Hello and welcome to your second video dealing with tricks with proportions. So on this one, we're going to focus first on interchanging the means, which sounds like something fancy but really isn't. So let's say you have this proportion, AB equals CD. You are able to manipulate that so that you interchange the means. You didn't see off camera, I did air quotes. Here are the means. Those two right there. And so we're just going to flip them. So that's going to become A over C equals B over D. So all we did was switch the C and the B back and forth from each other. Now, why does this work? Well, because what you're really doing is you're multiplying both sides by B over C. And as long as we do the same thing to both sides of the equation, we're good to go. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So first we have AB, and if we multiply that by B over C, that equals CD. And if we multiply this side by B over C, then what do we get? Well, we get to cancel these two out, and so that becomes A over C, and we get to cancel these two out, so that becomes B over D. So that's how we get to that point. Let's put in a couple of numbers and just prove to ourselves that this is actually a legit maneuver. So let's say we had, for AB, we have 1 over 4. And that equals CD, which is 5 over 20. And before we go any farther, let's just prove to ourselves that that is correct. So either in your head or with your calculator, you know that 1/4 is the same as 0.25. And again, using your calculator or your head, 5 over 20, you know, reduces to 1/4. And that also equals 0.25. So we are convinced that this is a true statement. So what interchanging the means allows us to do is it allows us to flip the 4 and the 5. So it becomes 1/5 equals 4 over 20. All right, let's get out our handy dandy calculators again and see if that is true. 1/5 is 0.20, or just 0.2 if you prefer. And 4 divided by 20 is also 0.20. So that works. So again, what we are saying is we are not saying that 1/4 becomes 1/5 or anything crazy like that. No, what we're saying is that if you start with a true statement, which we did, we started with 1/4 equals 5/20, that you can flip these two numbers and come up with another true statement. That's all we're saying. True statement, little wiggling around, and another true statement. Okay? So this wiggle allows us to flip these two numbers. These two numbers are called the means. And so you're interchanging or switching the means. Okay, so I often get a question at this point that says, well, what about the extremes? How about the other two numbers? Can I flip those? And the answer is yes. Now, Fred doesn't say this in his book, but we are just going to prove it to ourselves because it's cool. Interchanging the extremes. That means that if you have A over B equals C over D, that is allowed to become, now we're switching these two, so it can become D over B equals C over A. Now, why does this work? Well, because you're really multiplying both sides by the same fraction, and that is the fraction D over A. Let me show you. So if you have A over B and you multiply that by D over A, that is going to equal C over D multiplied by D over A. So, again, A times D over B times A, I can cross off these A's, and so then that leaves me with, I need a good color here, D over B. And over here, I would cancel out my two D's, so I would get C over A. And that is exactly what we're saying. Okay, so you can also flip the extremes. Let's do an example. Let's say that we have 1/4 and 5/20. So this is the same fraction that we used before. And we are going to be able to flip that, according to this rule, into 20 over 4 equals 5 over 1. Okay? Now again, we are not saying that these two are equal to each other or these two are equal to each other. No, we're saying that this relationship is true and this relationship is true. Let's prove it to ourselves. Again, 1 divided by 4 is 0.25, and 5 divided by 20 is also 0.25. Over here, if we take 20 divided by 4, we get the number 5, and here 5 divided by 1 is 5. So you can see that these fractions are not equal to each other, but the relationship between these two fractions is true, and the relationship between these two fractions is true. Now before we go on, I thought that you might need some help remembering, am I flipping the means or am I flipping the extremes? Okay, so pretend like this is your formula. What is the first letter that you wrote when you wrote this formula? You wrote the A first. And what was the last letter that you wrote when you wrote this equation? D. Those two are your extremes. The first one that you write and the last one that you write. These are called the extremes. Extremes. These two are the ones in the middle. Sorry, losing control here. These two are the ones in the middle, and they are called the means. So you may either flip the means or you may flip the extremes. You can't flip one of each and have it work out. No, that won't work. But you can flip either one of those. All right, so that is yet another way to work with proportions.